Good evening. I didn't think I would come back online that fast, but today's events over in Germany um, made me look at this, and I thought I'm going to post another video to give you some ideas about why there seems to be such a circus for the Ukrainians to get any heavy weapons out of Germany. The German electorate, the German voters, voted last year. And it has been pretty much since the founding of West Germany 1949. Then whenever the economy is doing good and the people are doing good, the middle class is doing good, that they tend to vote for the Social Democrats, for the socialists. Maybe some green, maybe some liberals, Our liberals, the FDP, the Free Democratic Party, what we would care, they're more like libertarians rather than liberals in the American sense of Democrats. The socialists are socialists. They're not even trying to claim to be progressives to cover this up. They're just telling you flat outright, we are socialists. So the last election they had, I forgot now when that was, I think it was in the fall. The strongest party at some 20-odd% was the SPD, the Socialist Party of Germany. And their head guy, Olaf Scholz, became then in a coalition with the Green Party and the FDP, the Free Democratic Party, the Libertarians, the Chancellor. It took a while because it is an oddball mix what you got there, to say this at least. And normally Germany votes conservative, that's the Christian Democrats, when the economy is not doing well and there's unemployment and that sort of stuff. Then they go and vote conservative. When everything is hunky-dunky-dory in the country, more or less, then they do this social experiment, whatever. I've never understood this, but this is what they're doing, and this is what we had. So after 16 plus years of Merkel, they decided to go and vote for Olaf Scholz. They were more concerned about the gender issues, what we're discussing today, all that stuff what you get in America with the liberals. That's basically what was concerned, what the electorate was concerned with. They didn't picture that they're going to wind up in a war situation like this. And now what we have to know about Olaf Scholz is that he was born in 1963, which means he turned 18. Let me see, 60, 83, 80. Yeah, that would have been 80. Is that right? Yeah, 17, 18, 81. He would have been eligible to go through our compulsory military service, which we had during that time, which was mandatory. The only option he had was, I think it was 15 months or 18 months at that time. I did not serve in the German Bundeswehr. I would have had to go there too in the late 80s for two reasons. Was I was here registered in the United States with selective services, which means I would have to fight for the United States if it came to that. If I would have been drafted, I would have done that. And the other thing is I'm a defense contractor, and I was doing defense work back then already. Plus, I was involved in NATO, in the headquarters in SHAPE, 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 Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Pact in Europe, in Mons, which is outside of Brussels. And I've been there, I don't know how many times. And so in the military headquarters there, so I was involved in that end as well. So that got me out of the compulsory military service in that sense, but I have been dealing with these things ever since I was 18 on a different level. Anyway, in Germany, we had the possibility that you could claim a conflict of conscience, that you could not kill another person, and that would exempt you from the compulsory military service, but you would have to do a compulsory civil service. So these people usually then wound up working in nursing homes and, attending the gravely sick people and that sort of stuff, mostly civil servant, civil jobs, nursing jobs, more in the religious field on institutions run by the religious groups. So Scholz did this. And now we have a person who has actually been accepted or was accepted in Germany, in West Germany at the time, as a recognized person with a conscious conflict in killing people as Chancellor. And there's quite a few in the political power system now who have gone through the same thing what he did go through. Now, these people are going through a tremendous amount of turmoil at this point. You can't imagine you become elected, you don't want a war, but yet you have to deal with the war. You're watching people getting killed, in this case, Ukrainian civilians. We're talking genocide here. And yet, on the other hand, you're so paralyzed by all of this stuff because of your that's like that internal conflict, that riddle. It is so bad that the guy can't even make a decision as a chancellor whether or not to send heavy weapons, which will kill then more people, most likely Russian soldiers in this case, to the Ukraine. And you have these type of people here in power too, to a certain extent in the United States and in other European countries. So this is like that peace movement, that Easter peace movement thing in the church. The Catholic Church is involved in it, and you got the Lutheran Church involved in it, the Protestants, and this is a drawn-out thing, and they don't want any war, but they don't want to do any of this, and they would just like this whole thing to just go away. They just want Putin to go away. They want the war to go away, so they don't have to deal with any of this stuff. And this is why the Ukrainians are so strapped right now for ammunition, for weapons, heavy weapons, and everything else what comes with it. The underlying question in this is this, what I thought about this is, if I was in that position to be chancellor, would I send German tanks, even though with Ukrainian soldiers, into war with Russia? Now you have to remember, in that eastern region, the entire Ukraine had seen German tanks and artillery and everything else before, from 1941 on, until 1944, until they started to retreat. So, but this time it would be a very different situation because you don't have any German soldiers involved in it. You would have only the vehicles or the armor, the tanks and that sort of stuff, the heavy equipment in there. Of what kind of is that a reliving of this time? Is it different today? How would Russia view this? And that sort of stuff. I mean, after all, as more as the West is going to get involved in this war, as more potentially it could become a war in Europe, a full-blown war. So that has to be looked at as well when you're looking at ammunition or weapons deliveries to the Ukraine. On the other hand, this is David versus Goliath, and at one point or another, the Ukrainian army, and rather sooner than later, will need to have some heavy weaponry to defend their country. In this case, this is a situation of a national defense. No country wants to be invaded by another country for whatever reason, no matter how you look at it. How valid or invalid these reasons are. You have to be able to defend yourself. So, should there be German tanks involved in it or not? That is a debatable question. I think under the given circumstances of this particular war or special operations which are conducted, I think it would be okay for Germany to deliver these weapon systems and tanks to the Ukrainian army. That is my personal opinion. The ex-military, some German ex-military Bundeswehr general or generals had stated that they were concerned about the complexity of the German tanks, which is true. They're highly complex equipment. This is not just a vehicle, there's not a car where you turn the ignition in and you drive off. On the other hand is, who knows for how long these tanks are going to last in a battle. You can deliver the amount of tanks. That would be the next question. If the Russians have 20,000, 40,000 tanks, you will have to have thousands of tanks, not just German tanks, but American tanks. And, you're going to get into a full-blown tank battle. That will take a tremendous amount of tanks. If they're thinking about sending 20 tanks or something like this over from Germany, that ain't going to do any difference, because in one offensive, in one battle, they take out 20 tanks. That's the end of it. German tank, American tank, Russian tanks, it doesn't make any difference. The numbers this is a numbers game. And with military operations in general are a chess game. And as better you are playing chess, and the Russians are excellent chess players, remember that. The strategies you follow through is trying to think of how your opponent, your enemy, what is their next move. So you have to anticipate their next move and counteract it and plan this out. Most military people I've known are excellent chess players. In my own family, I know that for a fact. I can play chess. I'm not going to say anything. I play chess. And I can make moves. And so when you look at the situation, you look at where they have positioned the troops, where they're going, the strategic positions, and the infrastructure in there, and everything else what comes with it. You will need a large amount of tanks, a large amount of artillery. I think 18 howitzers, if I read this correctly, were delivered yesterday, or they're sitting on the Polish border. The logistics start here basically is you have to get this now from the borderline, Poland, to the front lines. That is something the Ukrainians have to work out, because they know their country better than anyone else. So the best thing is not to say anything, but just let them deal with it with the way they think they need to do it. But 18 howitzers is about the same as, you can't even compare this. This is not a drop in a bucket. This is not even a drop in a bucket. This is not even a pin needle in a bucket. That is basically nothing. That is maybe an atom in a bucket in this whole scale of what we got now. So this is something the West has to think about. It is that in the defense industry, I deal with Lockheed Martin. They're some of my customers, McDonnell Douglas, Boeing, missile facilities out here in St. Charles, St. Peter's, outside of St. Louis. They're not fully set up yet for war production, to get this whole thing going on a larger scale. If it comes to this, and neither is the German defense sector prepared to deal with this on a larger output, no matter what it is. They would have to ramp up the production and everything else, and it's going to take some time. This whole infrastructure is not there. No one was prepared in the West for this type of a war, and I'm not so sure that the Russian Federation is fully prepared for this on their end either. So we take that with a grain of salt. That's somewhere in there. Now back to this first argument, the earlier argument is what the German generals or ex-generals, retired generals said is the equipment is too complicated to operate in a battle, or for untrained people, I should say, or not enough trained people, then that the training takes a long time. Well, that means that German tanks are only good in a maneuver if you can't use them in the battle. I want to give you an example. by the time the Operation Barbarossa started, the tank crews, the tank commander was on average 30 to 35 years old. That was in 1945. 3 years later, by 1944, when they started to retreat, the average age of the tank commander was 18 to 19. So as longer a battle draws on, as more you're going to lose your most experienced military personnel. They're either going to get killed or they're going to get injured or they get moved somewhere else. And because a crew has expired or is not available, doesn't mean that the tank doesn't work anymore. So that means that you have to have a tank or any type of military equipment where you can train new recruits. In World War II, the norm was 2 weeks basic training and 2 weeks then on the job, basically. So within 4 weeks, you had someone coming in from outside the military until they got to the front lines within 4 to 6 weeks, basically. And they had to operate that equipment. If you have to train someone, a tank crew, and a commander for 3 years or something like this, you're never going to have a war. Your equipment is going to die out in the field, and no one knows how to operate it. So the complexity to fight a war is what we're looking at, a full-blown land war, a tank battle, a traditional tank battle. This is what we're looking at here. This kind of stuff is basically out. You can move a tank like this with a highly qualified crew into Afghanistan in limited, combat scenarios with a little bit out there with some guys out in the mountains, somewhere, and you shoot a few things and then you go back to the camp and that sort of stuff. That may work. But in that kind of a scenario, what we're having here in the Ukraine, this is a no-no. So that means essentially is what the general or the retired general told us is that the German tanks are not suitable for that kind of a warfare. And that means they're not really suitable to defend Germany either, to put it quite blank. So something doesn't add up here. You cannot have a military where you have people so highly qualified to operate a tank that, that they can't be replaced. I mean, this is the kind of the crazy arguments, or the arguments what we're hearing out of Germany. These are the realities of the stuff. And what I can tell you is, looking at the current scenario as it is unfolding at this moment, today is Tuesday, April the 19th of 2022. It is nighttime here in the United States, which means it is already April the 20th over in Europe, early morning hours on the front lines. The strategy, and this is becoming pretty clear, that this is going to be a drawn-out, traditional war or military operation in a theater, in a regular battlefield type theater. That's what we're looking at. And numbers are the key to winning this. Tactics, strategies, and numbers, supplies. And unless the West gets really serious and realizes this, the Ukraine is going to suffer heavy losses. The Russians will also suffer heavy losses in this because of the weapons the Ukrainians already have, anti-tank and anti-aircraft missiles and that sort of stuff. But in the end, this is going to be a numbers game. And the rule in war is that you never have enough ammunition is what you had planned for in peacetime. So that means whatever they're planning, because these people are still in peace here. They're living in peace times in Western Europe and in the United States and the other countries. So no one has really geared up for any real war scenario, which we hopefully won't have. The strategy at this point with weapons deliveries from the West to the Ukraine seems to be dealt with from the Russian side by shelling and bombing more or less long range, medium range Lviv. And because that seems to be a staging point or an area where those type of transactions of weapons exchanges or weapon deliveries, that kind of stuff where logistics come into the game, and that's why they're targeting that particular area. If they're starting to target other areas on those borders, then you will know this is where the Russians suspect that weapons are coming in. They know everyone is listening to everyone on this. In Germany, you have the MAD, that is der Militärische Abschirmdienst, and you have the BND, which is the Bundesnachrichtendienst. In Great Britain, you have MI6. Here in the United States, we have DLA, Defense Logistics Agency, and DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, besides the CIA and the FBI. All of them are listening in on this. They're listening on the Russians. They got more satellites out there crawling over every square inch in the Ukraine, Poland, everything, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Czech Republic, Slovak Republic, Hungary, all of these countries which are bordering there, Romania, Estland, Eastland, and Lithuania, all of those places are being monitored. The West is going to monitor Prussia, which is belonging now to the Soviet Union, the most eastern part, with our old capital, Königsberg, Kaliningrad today. They have short-range nuclear weapons there stationed. That is something I never thought that at our territory that we would see Russian nuclear weapons stationed. But that's the way it is. So at this point, these strikes come. If there is a certain threshold reached for the Russian command, then you may see some type of missile attacks specifically going into a NATO country if they're disliking the weapons coming in, or if they cannot control it on the Ukrainian side. That would be then the NATO alliance call, so to speak, to get engaged in this stuff. I do not think that the NATO has enough military forces or equipment along the borders. I think it's around 150,000 men at this point, with the bulk from the Americans. Several tank divisions from Germany are there, besides American tank divisions, which can enter the Ukraine. But you have to remember this. They're on the Polish side, which means, and the front lines are right now all the way to the east, and Ukraine is a very large country, which means you have to move all of the stuff under attack, air attack, and everything else through the Ukraine to the battlefield, which is not an easy undertaking, even if you have the Air Force capabilities and weaponry we have. The Russians have a lot of weaponry too, more so probably than the West does, and they're in a better position because they're already engaged in a war. So we will see on how this is going to play out. I feel very sorry for all these people. And, I did not think it would come to this. I had listened to the president here in the United States who said they keep building up, they keep building up, they keep building up. Yes, and for years we have known that this could get out of control, but everyone had thought they had wrapped Putin and the Kremlin in enough to avoid this, and at this point we have learned this is not the case. Now, most Russians are brainwashed basically by what they're exposed to. Some Russians have left because of this. They didn't like what they were seeing. And most Russians, they're trying to grapple just with the realities of this, and they're going to try to figure out on how they're going to stay alive. So it is a real bizarre, situation. I hope and pray for the Ukraine that the Western world is going to come to their senses and they wake up from their dream, from their pacifistic dream world they're living in, to the reality of combat. and that they are understanding that they will have to do a lot more than what they have been doing or what they thought they needed to do, because just of the scale of what is building up at the moment. And I don't think that there is a room or a time right now for peace talks. This is too far gone. There's too much at stake, and the Russian side has committed already a huge amount of human life into this in terms of their military personnel, which has been eliminated, expired, and they will trying to get capital out of this. So it doesn't look like a lost war. When you have a lost war with a lot of casualties on your side, that makes the loss even worse than if you just lose. But if you lose a lot of soldiers, then it's a pretty big loss. That could alter the entire political scene in Russia, and not necessarily for the better. It could go even more totalitarian and possibly right-wing from where it is at this point. That is something I wanted to point out. To believe the Western happy la-la belief system that if Putin fails with the war, democracy is going to prosper all over Russia. And, that is something I would be utterly cautious about. There is, in Russia, right-wing nationalist groups, active parties. They're elected and they're in position and in power. And they're even further to the right as Putin is with the current government. And they have a pretty good sized backing within the common Russian people. And that is something the West has to be very, very cautious with, is if that regime or the current government fails, of what to expect. It can get a lot more to the right. This is not going to go to the left, not in the socialist dream world they live in. This is going to go to the right once it fails. And the argument for this is going to be, we need to have more control here. And we lost the war if they lose it, because there wasn't enough control to begin with. We were bamboozled by them social democrats from Germany, and we had too much democracy here already, and this is why we didn't win that war with the Ukraine. And that is the real danger in this. Once you get that type of a totalitarian right-wing government installed in the Soviet Union or in the Russian Federation, that's going to be very different from what we had since the October Revolution 1917. And that is a very, very good possibility. So we have to look at all of these facts and all of these things. And meanwhile, if a politician watches this, which I hope I can reach you, is I would urge you to do two things. For one is to deliver the weapons the Ukraine needs, and that includes heavy weapons. And it's going to be 1,000 times more than what you're thinking right now in terms of the quantities. Just multiply everything by 1,000. And then the second thing is start thinking already of what you're going to do if the Russian Federation is going to become a right-wing state. And with that, you have a great evening.